Recording. Yeah, so we just did this episode on The Wire, and we figured it'd be worth mentioning outside of it, or in tandem with it, the passing of the great Lance Reddick, who played Daniels in the show. One of the pivotal characters, very important to the plot. Phenomenal actor. He's been in a number of great TV shows over the years. Obviously, a number of films. Like, he's just in the new John Wick movies, so he's in all of those. He's one of the main characters in the show Fringe. He's on Lost. Plenty of other credits. Sad to see him go. He died pretty young, but we figured we'd do this Wire episode as timely as ever with him passing away.
Tribute to you, Lance Reddick.
Keep it real.
The Art Fisher podcast. Today we're going to be talking about critically acclaimed TV show The Wire.
That's right.
For those of you that haven't seen it, this came out, forget the first year that it came out. When was it? 2004?
Yep.
2003? Okay.
Oh, 2002.
And it ran until 2008?
Yep.
Yeah. So you could say it came out during one of the golden eras of TV, alongside such shows as The Sopranos. Breaking Bad started soon after it. Mad Men was running alongside this and after.
Yeah,
What
at the very end.
What else was there around that time?
Other big shows, FX shows started to take off then. So there was stuff like The Shield, which is pretty similar to this, and then at the end of that, stuff like Justified and Sons of Anarchy were kind of in the same vein.
Right. So
but this show is definitely when HBO was hitting their stride.
Yeah, this show came out, and it is all about the city of Baltimore. So the show creator is David Simon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you actually found out something that he like talked with the current mayor of Baltimore or something like that. What was the story around that?
Yeah, he somehow got to talk with the mayor of Baltimore like right before they started making the show, and he was very open about like just how dark the show was going to get and how it was kind of going to be far more realistic, a police procedural than a dramatization. And the Baltimore mayor at the time was like, all the better for it. Maybe it'll help people to recognize our problems and change something about them.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty safe to say that this show is, in my estimation, one of the most true to life shows out there, depicting not only the city of Baltimore, but just American cities, bureaucratic problems, educational problems, police and like criminal problems, as well as like how they are foils of one another. I think this show does a tremendous job of providing foil characters on opposite sides of quote unquote the law, but also the characters just are very similar, but they're just in complete like opposite domains or opposing domains, and does a good job of not necessarily saying one is right, but sort of villainizing I don't want to say all parties, but like there's a lot of moral ambiguity throughout the show, and also demonizing of you know, making the wrong choices as well.
Yeah, I mean the most like lawful, duty-bound, honor-coded cops in the show still get their hands dirty somewhere along the way. And there
Yeah,
aren't very many of them, even from the just onset, that are morally good. Like most of them immediately, like your introduction to them is they're just happy with police brutality or indifferent towards death.
that's the Western District way.
Exactly. But the same is true. I guess we'll sort of get into it. I mean, I was going to say, like, why should we talk about this show?
Yeah, let's
Obviously,
do that.
anyone who's familiar with the American TV landscape has definitely heard of The Wire. I don't know how many people have actually sat down and watched the whole thing, but it still remains today one of the most critically acclaimed television programs, even for a network like HBO, who's constantly made hit after hit. This one still gets talked about very positively. And airing at the same time as The Sopranos, that's huge. Um, Something we were going to talk about later is the fact that the show never really had a huge following or an audience as it aired, probably because it was competing with something like The Sopranos on HBO. But not only that, it's competing with the same tired procedural cop shows on CBS and NBC and Fox, stuff like CSI and NCIS, like all of those types of weekly syndicated catch the killer programs. Um, and I mean, even like I mentioned the Shield earlier, even the Shield always has to go in a very strong, more violent direction or more extreme direction than this,
Problems
either to end
not
or to shock the viewer. And that's sort of where I want to start with talking about The Wire. Is it's not so realistic that it's closer to being a documentary than it is fiction. Entertaining really helps. Does care about
dark, tragic quality,
in a way in which,
especially like the cops that they have every.
and they go.
You're more to
The show rarely wants to be sensational, and it doesn't have a lot of action to it. Like there aren't a lot of scenes occurring in this on the outside of the gunfights or duels. There are some of those things. Like there's
up a lot of like the sub
show is still, entertaining and
important beats.
is quippy and often humorous, but by and large, these characters act like what they're doing is their job.
I forget exactly the
Of the actors really helps. Lo and behold, I've done that a long way.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah,
My mic, the cord just popped out because I accidentally cut it out, so I missed what you said.
have a way where.
So,
Yeah, I said a whole bunch.
yeah, sorry. No, I agree. I think also something that's worth side like Kink you were talking about sensationalized. There's
It in the
certainly is dark. I don't know. I mean, you could call it a tragedy. There
yeah, that's I say
are more tragic or have tragic qualities to them. Um, but at the same time, like it does provide you with like there are some emotional beats to it, but then also there's quite a bit of humor as well. Like the characters themselves are humorous. There are a number of characters that like anytime they're on screen, they provide some level of either hilarity or like just bumbling around or saying funny stuff.
like he's never.
And I think that's obviously like true to life. Jan also it's true to the position that they're in. Like especially like the cops, like the cop humor that they're like everyday life is literally just like so dark.
I believe it. There's
And with like the drug dealers or actually like the humor that they have every single day. Like that's how you get by. Otherwise, you just give in to how disheartening it all seems.
Yeah, I think I read a David Simon quote when I do somewhere along the way of reading about this, where he was criticizing some of those other cop procedural shows and saying that there would never
Do that in
scenario in real life where a homicide detective would look down at a body and go like, "God damn!"
Yeah. Oh my.
Because to him, there was no shock about the gruesomeness of any murder. It was just, we're professionals. This guy died. Let's get to it. And this show sets the stage for that literally right off the bat. Like, it just jumps into the murder of Snot Boogie, and they go from there.
Yeah, and similar in a similar way to, like, you know, the humor as well. Like, they didn't have to name the kid Snot Boogie, but they do.
No, they had to name him Snot Boogie, a long running.
And like, you're mortified by the scene, like, this kid was killed, but then also
Guy's name
says his name over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And his, like, I mean, there's something to be said about Dominic aesthetic as well. Like, him just going Snot Boogie like over and over again on the street with like flashing lights.
There's
And he's like sitting there with the kid's friend, or the guy that shot him, right? He's seated with that kid.
right, like he's arresting him and
I was like, yeah,
like why he committed the murder.
He has to do with like the craps game.
Exactly.
Because the kid grabbed the dice and ran, or he grabbed the money and ran. He's like, yeah, that's a very iconic situation.
So yeah, outside of
yeah, he's not smart.
I would say the two biggest reasons to talk about this show, or the two biggest reasons why it may be the best TV show ever made, is that it's got just the craziest, most intricate plot. That so in terms of TV shows with intricate plots, usually what that huge cast of characters that are constantly off screen, doing forced need to pick up from inference in the dialogue, and the dialogue rarely spells out for you what has occurred scene to scene or in between by any character. And this show thrives on that idea. And as we'll get into, season to season, the character cast changes and always deepens. So they're adding more characters to the bench of characters that'll look you to pop in and out. But on top of that, they'll add a new layer to the city of Baltimore, that there's a problem occurring in this whole system that they call the game, which is basically the drug game, but the drug game includes everyone both in the law and on the outside.
Getting those
So
number on the state
primarily about
strictly by number, but you shouldn't just do like
that murder eventually leads to them trying to catch the Barksdales, which are a big crime family in Baltimore. And in the process of catching them, the police force has a bunch of strange backroom politicking where they assemble a task force of some very capable detectives and some very incompetent detectives, and they set up what they call the wire to catch them, both on their pagers and on phones, of
physically
lots of heroin. But that's pretty the plot of the whole first season. Bureaucratic, sometimes very boring and routine filled, all meant to be like no action, versus the same thing happening for the and so he loves certain players, be it some of the kids getting involved or the higher ups, like Idris Elba's character Stringer in Baltimore, or the actual boss of the family, Avon Barksdale.
Yeah, and this is a good stopping point for people. If you haven't seen any of it, he intrigues you, I would strongly suggest stopping listening right now, because we're going to go through the whole rest of the show and try to basically build
but then tragic
what the show is about, but also build up a lot of like the subtext.
Probably help him out.
Yeah, this is like a summary because Bub's the points, but what the show is like really going for. Because I've seen this show twice now. The first time I saw it, obviously, like, you get the gist of what's happening with all of the characters and someone you understand their arcs, but seeing it way that like
Trying to work.
start to see the forest for what it is. And both of them to have industrial nail. Each of the individual characters are like in
And he's like the great
with all of these different domains, which would be the city of Baltimore at the time, or it would be like any city basically. I think you could take this show and overlay it across like pretty much any city. Obviously, it's going to look slightly different if you're going to like Los Angeles or like Houston or any number of cities, but as far as like an American model of the problems, I think it's pretty unrivaled. So yeah, I mean that's pretty much season one. Did you want to talk about some of like the really important beats or like set the stage with the characters?
Yeah, I guess briefly, like the quote unquote main character of the show is a guy named Jimmy McNulty, played by Dominic West, and he's just a sort of run of the mill homicide detective. So he catches this killer of Snot Boogie because of a craps game, and it eventually leads him deeper into some of the intricacies of the Barksdale crime family, or just Barksdale gang. I don't remember what they called them specifically in the show. To be clear, I haven't seen The Wire in like 6 years, so some of the details are hazy, and some of the actual language they use is also going to be hazy.
I just finished watching it like a few weeks ago for the second time, so I can fill in those gaps. They call them the Barksdale Crew, I think is
Okay,
like
crew.
for the most part what they refer to them as.
Gotcha. Yeah,
But
so
yeah,
he bothers a judge because the judge lets one of the Barksdales go because the Barksdales intimidate a bunch of witnesses. And by bothering this judge, who uses a bunch of political capital to wield his own power, he sends ripples out to all of McNulty's bosses, the higher ups in the police department, which causes them to get together and create this wire unit to work together to try to catch the Barksdales.
yeah,
So some of those,
So McNulty basically kind of sort of goes over his boss's head, and his direct boss gets really pissed at him. And this is where they assert that line like the chain of command and like that shit trickles down, or I forget exactly the phrasing. Like the piss trickles down or something like that. Like
mhm.
so he doesn't get like shit canned, but like he nearly does throughout the first season.
Well, there's like a scene in the first episode where he's talking with his one boss,
Rawls or Jay.
Jay. And Jay is like, if you don't stop messing around, you're gonna get reassigned, and it's gonna be somewhere you don't want to go. And the conversation ends with Jay being like, "Where do you not want to be reassigned?" And he tells him the docks. And then, lo and behold, after the events of the first season, where does McNulty find himself?
Yeah, and I think Lester Freeman is the one who is like, yeah, you should have never told them where you don't want to go, because as
Yep.
soon as you have that conversation, that's just leverage that they're gonna screw you over by putting you there.
Yeah. So um their task force is made up of McNulty, who's the main character, Cedric Daniels, who's played by the very recently late Lance Reddick, who's kind of their leader. Um, there's Kima Greggs, and she's more of like a foot soldier with Herc and what's his name, Ellis Carver.
Yeah, and then
Those
Prez
guys are
Belusky.
bumbling fools. Yeah, Presbeluski's like the young rookie cop. Um, Lester is the like wise old guy who pretty much has everything figured out, but is sort of trapped by apathy and knowing that ultimately he's not making a huge difference because he's just been screwed repeatedly by his bosses for like trying to do his job.
Yeah, he's just a classic example of someone who is brilliant, but then the bureaucracy has just like whittled down and he can't really like he either feels like he can't make a difference or the only way he can make a difference is by bending the rules or doing it like his own way.
Mm-hmm. I don't. Was there anyone I missed? I think there's two other detectives that are on the task force, but they're both like.
Yes, there are two older guys. The one guy like comes up with an elaborate plan of falling down the stairs so he can get like workers comp, and then the other guy is just an alcoholic who like gets in like a severe accident. Oh, and that's what triggers the guy to come up with the plan to like fall down the stairs because he's like, yeah, this is great. This is the best thing ever because he visits him in the hospital and he's like in a cast in bed. And the guy's like, yeah, this is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Now I just collect pay and benefits and everything. And he's like, maybe you should get hurt. Oh, God. Yeah.
But basically, their sting operation like ends up kind of working, but what it uncovers is the fact that the police are like woefully unprepared for like doing battle with the crew or actually even stopping them from selling their drugs. No matter how hard they try, they're constantly being outmaneuvered by Avon Barksdale and Stringer Bell. And Stringer
Yeah.
Bell is like the real driving force for the Barksdale crew. Like he is the smartest character in the first season.
Yes.
Um, he always knows what the police are going to try to do. He knows how to keep control of his own people. He manipulates children into joining the crew. He manipulates children into killing each other. He is like a really ruthless businessman who his arc of the show is trying to take the crew legitimate. Like he wants them to have a way where they can operate as a real business that also still sells drugs, but it has enough of like a shell corporation, shell game to it that you don't really see what's going on.
Yeah, and there are a few other characters in this that are important in like the first season. Like obviously you have like Bodie, Wallace, and Poot, who are all
Yeah,
kind of like
those are like the younger
soldiers.
guys, kids.
Yeah, they're like the younger kids. Wallace is the youngest. Wallace is played by Michael B. Jordan, by the
Hmm.
way, as well.
A very young Michael B. Jordan.
Yeah, which I didn't know that he and Bodie actually were friends. Like in real life, they both grew up in Newark, apparently.
Oh, okay.
So they use like apparently like Michael B. Jordan did nothing to prepare for the role, but basically just used his own life experience growing up in Newark, uh, to like come across as authentic for playing that role. Um, and then the only other person that I wanted to mention aside from like Avon and Stringer is like Proposition Joe makes an appearance, I think, in like
Hmm.
episode 9, which is the basketball. It's called Game Day. Yeah, which is
Yeah.
there's a basketball game that is happening between East and West. And Prop Joe is the East Side like kingpin. Um, and he's a recurring character throughout and becomes more important in later seasons as well.
Yeah, and there's Maurice Levy, which is like
Yeah.
the Barksdale lawyer who's in the whole show. Um, there's Clay Davis.
Hmm.
Um,
Clay Davis
and
is
he's the
the
state
mayor, right?
senator. No,
Oh, the senator.
yeah, he's a
Senator.
state senator, and it's revealed very early on. I don't know if it's the first season, but it is revealed that he is like basically directly responsible for or implicit in the Barksdale money being laundered at some level.
Yes, he is. Sorry, Clay Davis is the one that's like, oh shit.
Shit.
Yeah.
He repeatedly says shit. and it gets longer and longer as the show goes on, to the point where there's like a 15-second one in like the fourth or
Yes.
fifth. Shit.
And his voice is also like so good. Like
Oh yeah.
I have no idea how his like someone can talk like that. Just
I can't do it at all. Like that's
yeah,
just
his voice is
station.
incredible. Like he'd be a great orator or like I I'm almost like imagining him like um yeah, I mean obviously like a politician or even like a pastor even. Like he just has such a good voice.
Yeah, that's Isaiah Whitlock Jr.
But yeah, he becomes a more important character, and he's kind of in the background in the first season. But then that's the beauty of the show is it actually builds up towards something else, and it's very clear from the outset that they understood where it was going to go, and like the entire house of cards that they were trying to build from the beginning, and it definitely pays off.
Yeah, because the first season ends with the task force getting disbanded. Like they kind of did what they were supposed to do. I forget exactly what happens, but basically, I think McNulty goes over somebody's head again.
They don't turn over the case to the FBI, but then they basically, yeah, they they decide to try to do it on their own, essentially.
Yeah, and everybody gets in trouble that's on the task force except Daniels,
Right.
because he's shown to have been able to get results and play a political game. So he gets a promotion at the end, and they like reassign him.
Yeah, and you're left with this perfect feeling that the other characters in the show are also left with, which is like, well, we tried to do it. We caught some of the people, but we didn't like bring justice fully, and then we got reprimanded.
Oh yeah, it feels like a gut punch. Like it feels like the House of Cards fell. And then season two begins basically with different characters in a different part of Baltimore, and it's like
Yes.
whiplash. Because the way we watch TV now is you can just start season two right after you finish season one. There's no, year to year delay for a show like this, so you can watch the whole thing. But it's definitely like it was a bold decision to just go, no, season two is going to be a different show now.
Yeah.
Like same characters, but here's 35 more of them, and they're going to start in a different place. And the ones that you really want to see, they're not going to be in every episode. They'll pop in and out. I mean, McNulty is still primarily in just about every episode. Um, but season two focuses a lot more on the technical aspect of how the drugs are getting into Baltimore, how they're being shifted throughout Baltimore. Um, there's more about the like sort of political infighting in the police department and a lot less about the day-to-day work of the police on the ground in the city, uh,
Yeah,
which they
which
double down on then in season three. But
yeah, and it season 2 I think they needed to have happen. Um I think they could have done it in a different way. Um it's definitely my least favorite of all of the seasons, but it is cool seeing like the way in which they're able to maneuver the drugs through the docks, and then you have a few new characters that are kind of interesting. I think that their arcs are somewhat lacking only because season 2 is a different show, and I kind of think season 2 is almost like a bottle season. Like it could be like its own standalone thing, which is fine. Like it's not necessarily bad. Um, but yeah, you have Ziggy Sabatka, Frank Sabatka, his Ziggy's dad, and then you have I can never remember
Spiros.
Nick Nikki. That's who it is.
Hmm.
Who is Nick Sabatka is Frank's nephew. And then yeah, you have Spiros, who is a guy.
Vondas.
What?
They call him Vondas or Vondas.
Yeah, and he works for this kind of shadowy character who's called the Greek, who ends up not being shadowy. He's just a guy in a hat and glasses who's
Yeah, just some
reads the
dude.
newspaper around, but he's the guy who's dealing the drugs and has access to a lot of drugs from Europe.
It's good. It's good you mentioned that like the Greek is just some guy, and they just show him like in a diner, and he's just like sipping some coffee, reading like. There's no villains in this that are larger than life.
Yeah.
Like this guy is like an international crime lord, but he's never portrayed as like twirling his mustache like yes, yes, and then we will steal the shipping containers and put the bombs like there's it's just oh yeah, it's crazy about the football game last night, huh? Sucks
Yeah.
Ravens lost.
And like there are a number of times where someone comes into the diner and they're like looking for someone to talk to, and then he's just kind of like he looks like he's might be like the janitor or like someone who makes like the eggs for the place, but he's just like sitting there sipping espresso, reading the paper, and he's like overhearing everything that's happening. And then whenever someone leaves, he like talks with Spiros or whatever. But he comes back in like later seasons as well. Um, and there's like a pretty gruesome. It's not that gruesome, but like probably one of the more gruesome scenes is when he ends up killing someone. Um, but
Don't even remember it.
they talk about how the one guy who is they call him Russian, but he isn't Russian. I think he's actually Ukrainian. And he's their like henchman guy who they end up tying to a bunch of murders because he ends up like cutting people's faces off and like cutting all of their like hands off.
Yeah.
And that's his like signature move. So because they find a bunch of bodies like that, Bunk is able to tie him to all of those murders, which then unravels another case, which we didn't really mention Bunk up until this point, but Bunk also works in homicide with McNulty, and he is a he's kind of a larger than life character. He's like always chewing a cigar and
That's true, yeah.
has a great voice, and he like looks like he belongs on like every homicide TV show that has come out since this, and he is on one actually. I forget what show he's on now, but I remember seeing him like he may have a cigar, but
He's
yeah.
in Jack Ryan.
Yeah, but he's also on like some procedural show now as well.
I believe it. There's 1,000 of them.
But anyway, yeah, he is a really funny character in his own right. And then when you put him with McNulty, like they're just like ridiculous together. Like there's the one scene where they actually end up figuring out that I think it was Weebay shot like a woman through like a window.
That's like in
Um
the first or second episode.
yeah, but
It's pretty early.
they go there and they just are swearing under their breath and
Yeah.
mumbling like over and over again.
Profanity laden scene. He's
And
just
it's
chomping on the cigar, just shit, motherfucker.
yeah, and they're going back and forth and they keep going like walking around and like bending down and looking from like different angles like what what the fuck? What? And then they just like keep doing that and it's like 3 to 4 minutes of them like Sherlock Holmesing the situation. And it's incredible. It's one of the best scenes I would say from that season, but also like the show in general, because it just visually is showing you like how they figured it out instead
Mm-hmm.
of like procedurally them talking through like how they figured it out. It's just brilliantly done. um yeah, I don't have a ton to say about season 2 other than it kind of sets the stage for the rest of it.
Well, if season 1 is defined by like a bureaucratic battle that the cops have to fight with each other, both about political climbing and infighting and personal beefs, and how that stops them from being able to actually shut down criminal operations. Season 2 goes into that and for the criminals, basically. Like that, their network with the Greeks and the Russians is sort of the same thing, because the Greeks and the Russians don't necessarily get along with all of like the Barksdale crew. They don't necessarily get along with Prop Joe, but they all work together to make money. But that same political infighting is what stops any one of them from becoming like a kingpin. And underneath that, like the main plot, I guess, story of season 2 is about like the working class people at the docks. And they're, because the show never really returns to them the way it returns to every other character, and it's sort of like just brushing them off, like these working class people are being crushed by this machine, like you're being crushed by the battle between, you know, law and drug dealing, but they're not really a part of it in the same way that everything else is that comes later on. And because some of it is portrayed that way, and the show's basically telling you it's not important, like it's definitely the one I look forward to the least when I do rewatch this.
I guess that's kind of the point, though. Like you
Oh, for
said,
sure.
is
Yeah.
like it actually has an overarching narrative there where it's like, no, these people aren't important. Like these are the people that give you all the things that you want so desperately, but like you don't give a shit about them, and they're just in the background. So yeah, I guess in that way it works. Um, Additionally, there are a few other people that we haven't mentioned that absolutely should be mentioned, like Omar.
Yeah, we
Um,
didn't. I figured we could leave the fan favorites out completely, just get people angry.
yeah, Omar is probably either my favorite or like he's up there with Bubbles as well.
He's the larger than life character.
Yeah, which
He's the
apparently, as we found out, apparently he Omar Little is based off of a real person who is doing something similar to that in Baltimore.
Yeah, quite a few of these people are just based directly off of real people.
So
I know
Omar,
Bunk is based off of a detective whose name was the Bunk.
what?
Yeah. And Omar was based off of a drug dealer who robbed drug dealers.
Yeah, he is like a Robin Hood guy who walks around with a trench coat and a shotgun, and every time he like walks across the street, there's a bunch of children getting on bikes who bike away to tell everyone like, Omar's here, Omar's coming, and it's just like, oh God, we gotta go hide, cause
Well, he
he's
also
out and
just
about.
kicks down doors and then shoots people with the shotgun. So
Yeah, but he like walks on the street and he's just whistling like the farmer in the dell. Yeah, the cheese stands alone, which is a great bit because then cheese, the character cheese
fucking
shows up.
Method Man.
Yeah,
Method Man plays a character. For those who don't know, Method Man is a rapper from the Wu-Tang Clan who plays a character named Cheese. Who,
cheese Wagstaff.
yeah, he becomes like more important towards the end of the show, but he backstabs Omar, which becomes a really critical point. And since Omar's like a fan favorite character, his just desserts that are delivered are primo.
Jesus, you literally said the words I was gonna say. Just desserts. Yeah. Uh,
Cheese.
But yeah, anyway, in season 2, Omar has like a I think this is when he has a face off with Mazone. Yeah, Mazone shows up
Yeah, we
in
haven't
this
mentioned
one.
him either.
Brother Mazone is a guy that shows up in order to take care of Omar because Omar is causing too much too much mayhem for the Barksdale crew.
Yeah, Brother
So
Mazone's like a legendary Islamic hitman
yeah,
who wears, the goofy bow ties and dresses like a nerd, but is just a stone cold killer.
yeah, and then also it's worth noting that Bubbles is a heroin addict, homeless guy in Baltimore, and he is utilized continually as a CI, confidential informant, by both McNulty as well as Kima Greggs, like constantly, and they do like help him, but they also just like use him like consistently, and other
Yes.
characters begin to use him like even more, to the point where like when they give him money also it's like a problem and you feel conflicted, like shit, they just gave him $20, like, and he like can't handle it because he just instantly goes and buys heroin with it. And yeah, he I think is arrested at the end of season 2 as well, and he starts to give more information to the cops that allows them to uncover like the different relationships of like the drug dealers.
Yeah, I would argue that Omar is like the heart of the show and Bubbles is the soul of the show.
Mm, that's a
Because
great way.
Omar's the one that, like, he frequently drives the plots. Every character knows who he is. He's larger than life. He bops in and out. He's not always there, but he's critical. Whereas Bubbles is like someone who is always around. You always see him, but he's always suffering. Like you said, he's taken advantage of by everyone. And his plight and tragedy is sort of just a long running undercurrent of everything that happens through the show.
Yeah, this is a good lead into then season 3. Um, season 3, I believe, is where a whole this is where the whole host of like the kids in the middle school come into play. Um, so you have Grant.
Uh, I
Where's
think
that
that's
season
season
4?
4.
Gotcha.
Um,
Maybe I'm jumping ahead.
yeah, season 4 is the kids one.
Gotcha.
Um, season 3 is where they start introducing the actual like political players. Um, there's so many characters. This is where the show starts to really take off because it becomes another show again, partially by introducing you to a bunch of new characters, but also because its focus is different. There's a new crew trying to take over Baltimore. What's that guy's name?
Marlo Stanfield.
Yeah, literally the villain for the whole rest of the show. Um, the Stanfield crew, and he's got a whole bunch of people under him. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's like basically the mayoral race for Baltimore takes up a lot of time. There's Carcetti. There's the current mayor. I don't remember any of these characters' names now. We're starting to get into a territory where there's too many names.
Who do you need to know?
The current mayor, his 3 assistants, Carcetti's main assistant, the Whisperer guy, a bunch of lawyers.
The Whisperer.
Yeah, the like magician whisperer guy who always
The
like
guy from
picks the
House of
winner.
Cards?
I could be.
What?
There's literally they don't call him the whisperer, but he's like the political magician. Like when he backs people up for mayor, they win.
The guy in the wheelchair?
Yes.
Oh. Um yeah. I I can't find his name.
It's not that important, but basically the beefs between the Barksdale crew
Mm-hmm.
and Prop Joe's crew and the Stanfield crew all come to a head. There's a bunch of plot. Omar is still involved, coming in and out. The police are coming in and out. They're constantly shifting alliances between everyone. Stringer Bell is really close to becoming legitimate. Um, Cuddy is introduced at this
Yes.
point.
Yes.
There's a guy named Dennis Cuddy Wise. Um,
Who gets out of jail, and
yeah, and
he's trying to like revitalize his life and find something that he can make a difference despite having a criminal record. The guy you're thinking of is State Delegate Odell Watkins.
yes,
um
and Clarence
Additionally,
Royce is the mayor.
yes, Royce is the mayor. Cuddy consults a local deacon to try to help him out. Um, who he kind of helps him. He kind of helps Cuddy. The local deacon also advises Bunny Colvin is his name, and
Yeah, we
he
haven't mentioned Bunny at all.
he was kind of in the background in the other seasons, but this season really puts the spotlight on Colvin. Colvin, at this point in time, his position is what is it?
Major in charge.
Yeah, he's major and he makes a bunch of really big decisions in this because he's like really frustrated with the crime. I think this season actually opens with him talking at a church and basically the people there, it's either this season or season 4, but basically they're like completely disgruntled with where they're living. There are drug dealers on like every corner and they're like, I can't, like, it's not safe here. Like, what's going on? So he comes up with this plan to make an area called Hamsterdam, which is where he literally busses all of the drug dealers and is like, yeah, you can sell dope here. Just sell dope here. Don't do it anywhere else. Which is great in theory because then, all of the crime is not happening where people live, but then in this area, people still live there. Like there's this one like elderly couple that's like walking past like all of these corner boys who are selling. She's like super old, like with this like little like grocery bag and everything, and he sees this and he's like, "Oh my God, we got to get this lady out of here." But anyway, yeah, it results in this area of town just becoming like an absolute like hellscape of like homeless people, people like killing each other, doing a bunch of drugs here. Like there's a bunch of like uh not sex traffic, but like yeah,
Yeah,
not great stuff happening in this area. And then
but it
there are
does
like little
actually reduce crime.
there are a bunch of like young kids like milling about here as well, and they're getting paid off by the drug dealers to be here, and then it does reduce crime. So like as far as the numbers go, which Colvin was getting pressure from his higher ups, he's like, yeah, look at the numbers. And they're like, wow, how'd you do it? And he like doesn't really tell them what he did. He's like, but look at the numbers.
Yeah, so then at the end of the season, he gets fired because you can't legalize heroin and think you're gonna still be a major in the police force.
Yeah, the other crazy thing is that like there's like a fight and someone gets killed and then Ellis Carver moves the body outside of Amsterdam so they don't find it, but then they end up finding it anyway. And there's like this one guy from a news station who like ends up finding this area and he's like, what the hell is this? And he's like gonna go and release the report, but Colvin is like, no, just give me a week. Like just let me have a week. And he's like, all right, you got a week, but then we're releasing this as a story. Like we can't
Well,
just not release this.
it's because of Ellis's partner Herc, who hates the fact that they're letting drug deals happen. He's just like a stupid meathead policeman who's like, we gotta arrest them. They're doing drugs.
Yeah, yeah.
He doesn't sound like that. He has a Baltimore accent, but
No, he sounds, yeah. No offense to the Baltimore accent, but he just sounds really dumb and looks really dumb. He's not smart.
But yeah, he puts them out to a journalist, and eventually that results in Bunny getting fired, and that shakes up the whole political climate of the police.
But also Stringer meets with Colvin as well towards the end of this in order to give up like Avon's safe house, in order to like keep Avon in prison.
Yeah. Because he wants to be in charge and thinks he's smarter than Avon.
And then Brother Mazone meets with Avon and convinces him to give Stringer's whereabouts away so that Mazone can get revenge on Stringer because of this like elaborate thing that happened where Stringer basically set up Brother Mazone because he tried to have Omar killed. So Omar almost kills Mazone. Like, by all accounts, should have killed him, but then doesn't kill him and asks him, like, who, like, ordered this to happen. That probably doesn't mean anything to the audience, but it's really complicated. And basically, Omar and Brother Mazone team up to then exact their revenge on Stringer.
Yeah, either way, I think that the one that's the sort of the peak of the Barksdale story is Mazone and Omar killing Stringer.
And meanwhile, there's a wiretap happening this entire time where they're trying to gather information to build a case on the Barksdale organization, and McNulty also met with Stringer and is like trying to get enough information, and then right at the very end when they're about to get enough information, Stringer is killed. Right before he could arrest him. So that's how season 3 ends. I think the kids are in this season because Cuddy is here with like boxers. But maybe not. This season also includes the scene where Presbeluski accidentally shoots a black cop at night, and it's like completely unclear whether or not he shot him because he was black, and it like looked like he was going for a gun. I shouldn't really say it's completely unclear because they definitely paint it to the point where like he shot him because he was a black guy in an alley at night, and there were like sirens happening, and he was running.
And Presbeluski never should have been there because he was a bad rookie cop the whole time.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
Yeah.
He was only there because his father-in-law is one of the higher-ups for the police department.
Yeah, that ugly man.
Yeah, I don't remember his name.
His name is oh god, it'll come to me. But yeah, that leads into
Stanislaus Valchek.
It's Valchek. That guy is a problem.
I think he gets forced out.
Not at the end though. But anyway, leading into season 4. This leads into season 4.
Yeah, the kids are not in. Like, which kids are you talking about? There's like
Randy, Michael, Daquan. They must all be in season 4.
None of them are in season 3. They're all in season 4.
So they introduced Cuddy then before
and
that.
Michael and.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but yeah. They introduce Cuddy, but he becomes a main character in the 4th season. He's just in the background in season 3.
Gotcha.
He's more relevant because people are like, oh shit, Cuddy's back. Like, Cuddy's so cool. Cuddy was a really good soldier. And he's like, nah, I'm out of the game.
Here's a great quote from Stephen King on The Wire. Quote, "A dazzling three-ring circus of interwoven plot threads and its take on America's drug war makes Miami Vice look like a Saturday morning cartoon." That's pretty spot on. Yeah, so this season 4 includes the addition of some middle school kids who essentially they utilized to show you like what life is like from the younger kids' perspective, like the problems with the education system in the schools of Baltimore, but then they also bridge like the police into the education system in the schools by having Presbalewski get forced out as a cop because he shot the black cop at night, and so he's never like he's done being a cop, so he becomes a school teacher. And then Bunny Colvin, who also is forced out because he came up with that Hamsterdam idea, he then comes up with an idea to have an initiative in the schools, where they basically take all of the students that act out in class or like continually essentially ruin class for all of the other students. And they get all of those students together to try to work with them on like social skills as well as like actually learning and like improving their um, emotional and psychological health. Um, yeah, that's a huge part of this season. Bunny and Presbalewski, as well as the I think 3 or 4 kids. It's 4 kids.
Yeah.
Randy, Michael, Duquan, and there's another kid as well. Weebay's son. Namond is his name. Yeah.
Yeah, so season 3, what it mostly adds is it fleshes out the drug gangs and shows just how dog-eat-dog it is for them, because somebody like Stanfield is always going to pop up and try to take out someone like Barksdale, and people like Stringer Bell who believe that their machinations can lead to becoming legitimate will always be killed off because those machinations cause you to create enemies that you can't fend off forever.
Mm-hmm.
But on top of that, as they start to introduce the political stuff, which also, like the mayoral race, actually happens, I think, in season 4, um, with Carcetti.
Yes.
That
Yes.
picks up more in season 4. So they layer that in. They're saying, because they show you the connections between people like Clay Davis and other councilmen, and how Royce, the mayor, is involved in learning about Amsterdam, which ultimately just destroys him in the mayoral race because it's revealed that he's aware of this. And everything is about like crime numbers. It's all about how many crimes happen. And so, because there's all this shit happening with the police trying to cover up how much crime is actually occurring, it all blows back on Royce, who the whole time has been terribly corrupt and not implicitly involved in the drug trade the way that Clay Davis ultimately is, but um, he's definitely still pretty morally dubious.
He also just gets head from his secretary, which Herc like walks in on, which is a wild scene because it just comes out of nowhere. It's literally just Herc walking through like
Hey, comes out of nowhere. Hey.
yeah, just exactly. Walking through like it's not the Capitol, but like wherever it is that his office is. And
Yeah, like the Baltimore City Mayor building or whatever.
yeah, I was gonna also say that this season does a great job of showing how like everything is run by numbers. Like it's run by the drug numbers and the crime numbers, and then they mirror that with the numbers of like the education system and
Yeah.
just how like the state test scores are awful. And so then they give like the teachers an impossible task of raising the test scores to like obviously like a higher number than they had before, but the way that they go about trying to achieve that is only to raise the numbers and like they don't care about the kids learning anything. Like it's not about learning. it's just about getting those numbers up there. So they're just teaching the students like rote memorization and like giving them sort of like a script of like what to write so that they can like hit like a certain number on the state exam instead of teaching them how to actually approach it and building those foundational skills. Which obviously someone like myself as a teacher sees the problem with doing that, and then also sees like, you know, being motivated strictly by numbers as opposed to focusing on like this foundational skills. Focusing on how to teach those skills for students is how you get to the numbers, but you shouldn't just be motivated to hit like a certain number. And that's reflected in the methods that the police use in order to try to get their numbers. So they do like dubious practices in order to, they don't fabricate the numbers, but they're just like, yeah, we got these numbers. And on both sides, the cops and the teachers, but it's not like real, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So on top of comparing them that way, that's season four's main aim, is to thrust the political races into the spotlight. Some of the gang infighting, police fighting with the gangs, etc. That stuff takes more of a backseat, and then the kids become very important. Um, with the whole point of the kids plot sort of showing you, like, it's a missing piece you didn't know the show was always going to give to you, that tells you what the show is really finally going to be about, because
Absolutely.
it's showing you that this system, this machine of law and drug dealing and scheming and greed and ambition is hopeless. Like, there is no way to change it, because no matter how many good individuals there are throughout, like Bunny, who tries his best both as a police officer and then as someone working in the like special class with the school, like, he makes a difference for a few people, but ultimately the machine of the school is unstoppable and crushes these kids because they can't get enough help. If their parents are people like Weebay, then they're just fucked, and that's what happens to
Namond.
yeah, exactly.
But there is a really redeeming moment, like plot moment where um Colvin actually like meets with Weebay in season 5, I think it is, and he adopts Namond. So he
Yeah,
adopts Weebay's son, which is like really awesome because it's such a nice payoff, because Colvin like literally worked with this kid and essentially became like his mentor that he never had, and like a father figure, and like he really cares about him, and he tries to get him to not turn a new leaf, but like have like a paradigm shift in his thinking of not working on the corners, like focusing on his education because there's something greater outside of the school, as opposed to just like getting laughs or blowing off steam, getting in fights and whatnot. And so him adopting the Namond is awesome. Like it's such a satisfying payoff. But yeah, it's a shame because like obviously not all of the kids can get adopted, and they all have different problems. Um, so Naaman ends up with Colvin, but then you have Michael,
yeah.
who
Michael
is,
just becomes an assassin.
and Michael is kind of like he's not the big dog of the group, but he keeps going in and out of like wanting to box, and like he's clearly physically strong, like he's aggressive as well. And he's friends with all of these kids as well. Like they're all friends. Randy Wagstaff is kind of like, he's just like a really nice kid, um, who is kind of running like a candy business that he sells in the school. He sells candy to his friends and to other classmates. And then Daquan, who his parents, I believe, are like just fiends, like drug fiends, and he like he can't even take anything home because they'll like sell it off. So he always looks disheveled. Like I don't even know if they have clean water at their house. Like he doesn't have enough food. So Presbalewski, who, if you recall, was the guy who was kicked out of the police force, he becomes the teacher. So he actually teaches all of these kids, and he kind of takes Daquan under his wing, um, and really helps him out as far as like food, and he lets him shower at the school, and like he will like wash his clothes, like he gives him like a bag that he will take at the end of the day to wash his clothes. And then you have, yeah, Namond, as I said.
It
But
is worth mentioning that not only is like Presbalewski like, he shot a cop, but like that's the art of this show is that Presbalewski is sort of on and off screen intermittently, but like he's aware of the wire in season one. Like he's integral in making sure that the Barksdales go down. And as he pops up and creeps up, then he just shows up here. And it's all meant to be like, no, it's connected because this guy tried his best as a cop and couldn't because of just like he's shown not to be racist. Like
yeah,
he treats these kids the way he would treat any and really wants to help them.
yeah,
It's just an implicit racism to the system. Like he's
yeah.
forced to shoot this dude in the alley.
Mm.
Like he just like that's kind of what the show says is like he has no choice. He has to shoot him, and once he does, his career there is over. And like even just moving into the school system, he runs into the same problems. All his bosses are bureaucratic nightmares. They're all power hungry. They're playing games with each other. And his simplicity, the part of his job he's supposed to do is an impossible task because they just care about numbers. They're like, yeah, can you get those numbers up, please? And he's like, Dookie doesn't have shoes. And they're like, what? Who's Dookie? Fuck that kid.
Yeah. Yeah, and meanwhile Dookie is like a whiz at the computer, and so he like I forgot about this, but yeah, Presbalewski like puts together a computer that they had all the parts in the basement that were like Title IX resources that no one ever did anything with. So he puts it together, and like Daquan has the opportunity to like utilize this computer and learn a whole bunch of programs with that. But yeah, I never really thought about how he is like forced to shoot the cop. I don't know if I agree with that, but I know what you're saying. Like I see what you're saying. Like yeah, he's not racist, but like his bias causes him to shoot the that cop in the alley. And you're saying the system and like everything, every part of the system is pushing him to do that because that's his job.
Yeah, and the same is true even of a lot of the black higher ups within the police department who end up just either policing racist policies or agreeing to them.
Yes. Yes.
Not to say that, if you're black, you can't be racist, but like the show goes out of its way to tell you that there's just this is a character of this machine.
Yes,
Like
exactly.
the racism of keeping down every poor black person in Baltimore is a critical component to keep this thing running.
Yes, it's integral, and like that's exactly what the show is telling us.
And
You're dead on there.
like season 4 is definitely this is the most emotional season of the show
Yeah.
for me. Like it has some of the hardest hitting moments. Just watching the kids suffer is one thing. Like that's really hard, and it's very endearing to watch people try to help them. Between Presbalewski, Bunny, Cuddy, like they all know what can happen if these kids are not properly given support, and then they do end up just working for the gang anyway. Like Michael becomes a main player in the Stanfield gang in the final season. Dookie, I think, just becomes like a corner scout, both a
Yes.
dealer and a scout.
Yes.
And both those turns are really tragic. On top of it, Bubbles has his like most brutal moments of the show in this season.
Well, before the brutal moment, well, like, were you gonna mention when he's like getting beaten up by that one guy?
Yeah,
Yeah. So Bubbles, who is he's like the heroin addict guy who's homeless. He has like this kid who he treats like his own son under his wing, and they basically sell like t-shirts and like various things out of like a shopping cart to just other people on the streets. And this one guy is like antagonizing him and just continually finds him and beats the shit out of him and takes all of his money. So Bubbles is like trying to like actually not be um a heroin addict basically, and this guy continually antagonizes him, and so he basically turns to the cops to try to help him out, and they're so busy that they can't really help him or don't really help him until he gets Herc, who is, you know, the bumbling meathead guy, and Herc promises to come and help him out. So he gives him his number, and Bubs calls him, and then he like can't show up because Herc is like interrogating someone, and his like boss forces him to do that. Um, and he doesn't stand up for it and try to help Bubs out. So Bubs gets like the shit kicked out of him again. So then Herc meets with him the next day and asks him for like the license plate of like a drug dealer, and Bubs gives him the license plate of like a deacon or like a pastor. So Herc pulls this guy over and like roughs this guy up, this black preacher, and this old preacher as well, and yeah, Herc gets like completely fucked over because of this, because you know he's also illegally using police force on someone that does not have drugs or anything in a routine traffic stop, and that happens because Bubs is pissed at him because he doesn't like help him out. Um, but yeah, sorry, I ruined your. You were leading up to what happens to Bubs. If you want to talk about that,
Yeah, he's like living with his friend Sherrod.
Sherrod.
Yeah. And Sherrod and him are just, yeah, hopelessly addicted to heroin. But the one guy who keeps beating him up is also addicted to heroin. So Bubbles concocts a scheme to mix cyanide in with some heroin and then trick the guy into taking it so that this monster can stop beating the shit out of him and Sherrod. But then tragically, Sherrod does this cyanide heroin and it kills him. And so Bubbles like gives himself up to the police, saying like I killed him, like just arrest me and throw me in jail forever. So they arrest him, and there's just this really emotional scene where he breaks down in the police station and then tries to hang himself. And Jay, of all people, Jay Landsman, who has been just an asshole the entire show, like saves his life, and then instead of charging him with murder, sends him to get psychiatric help in just like one of those other small rare moments of humanity that this guy has been shown to never show to anyone else. He's finally like, nah, I should probably help him out.
Yeah, this is an awesome it's such a like brutal mix of emotions because like it literally like Jay opens the door like to the interrogation room and Bubs is hanging from the ceiling and you're like, oh my god. And before that, like the whole reason Jay wasn't in there was because Bubs threw up on him. So he had to go to the bathroom to like wash himself off and you're like, oh my god, like he's gonna be pissed. He's in the bathroom like singing to himself, just like, yeah, you know, like another day's work. And it's like on his tie, and then he comes back in, and like that happens. And you totally like it's totally unexpected that he would help him out. Cause the scene before that, he's talking with like the other guy, and the guy's like, yo, he literally just copped to all of these murders. Like we can totally pin all of these things on him. And Jay's like, after like he sees like what happened, he's like, nah, man, we're not gonna do that. It's not he has a I forget the quote, but he says something like, "It's not all about the numbers," which is, yeah, just really great. And that's the end of season 4 as well.
Yeah, so this leads us into the fifth and final season.
The one other thing I wanted to mention though about the kids is I think at the end of this season, this is when um, Randy has to go to like he's in the foster care system, I think, or maybe that's in season 5. But there's like an elaborate plot basically that happens where Randy is labeled as a snitch by everyone in school, and like his house, like they burn his house, um the drug dealers, because they think he he snitched on this one kid, which he like kind of did but kind of didn't really, like he unknowingly did. And then the very end of season 4 also Bodhi. Once again, someone is about to reveal information to McNulty, and then they get got, and Bodhi is brutally killed in this episode at the end of season 4 by none other than Michael, who is committing his first murder, which ends up being a corner boy Bodhi. So it's starting to like come full circle in the way that like it's showing the kids are then growing up to be the adults that we've seen from the beginning in some way. Like they're starting down those roads.
And Bodhi was in like the second scene of the show.
Yes.
Who was already trying to work his way up.
Yes.
But because he saw the wrong thing and was seen talking with McNulty, he like gets out of the car with McNulty. So it's literally just a misunderstanding.
Yep.
But yeah, so they just kill him.
Yeah, they're like,
And that's
he's talking to the cops, he's got to go.
What's their name? Snoop and what's that other psychopath's name?
Christopher.
Chris, yeah.
He's a great character. I actually really like
Chris
his
Partlow,
character.
yeah.
Yeah, Chris Partlow. And Snoop she's a great character as well. Like both of them together, like the scene where she goes in and buys the nail gun, like the industrial nail gun thing, just like her whole aesthetic and even down to her mannerisms and like the way she talks is great. It's just so Baltimore. But yeah, this leads perfectly into season 5. So at the end of season 4, also, we didn't really mention, but Carcetti was elected mayor. So he's mayor now, like a few episodes before the end of season 4, I believe.
Yes. Yeah, he does get elected mayor. He wins because of the numbers thing, and he's like the great new hope for the city. Like it seems like he could actually make a big difference in the city.
Perfect. So let's take a break here before we get into season 5 and then finish this thing off. Be right back.